So why is he singling out India? Is it because he knows he can't attack China? China's too big, so he's like, okay, I'll go after India, claim a huge win, and we'll maybe just kind of don't mention China, and everybody will forget
Yeah,
about it.
nobody will notice.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, I think that's basically it. It's just that there's some hope that India's soft. Well, the days following Liberation Day, India actually appeared to be more accommodating. Unlike China, China was very firm from the start. We're not going along with this at all. We're not playing this game. You're going to do this to us. We're going to retaliate. But the Indians were much more flexible. And maybe there was a hope that they would be flexible again. And then it just in general, okay, they are the number two purchaser of Russian oil. And but China, we really can't go after them, so we'll just go after India's the soft or the weak link. Maybe that's the hope, but it doesn't seem to be working. India is saying, we're a sovereign country, we're not going to do this. We're going to buy oil from whomever we please, and they have continued to buy Russian oil.
and when we say that there are now 50% sanctions now levied on India, my understanding is that that doesn't really paint the whole picture. Like you said, there are a lot of carve outs. From my understanding, is they're mainly targeting the diamond industry. It seems like that it's actually a small percentage of India's exports that are actually being directly targeted. Is that right?
Yeah,
The
I wouldn't
sanctions.
say it's a small percentage. We're still talking about billions, even tens of billions of dollars. I mean, it is going to affect the Indians. Leather, diamonds, you mentioned, that's one of the big ones. But there are a lot of products that are going to be affected. The ones that are exempt are pharmaceuticals. That's a big one. Yeah, the oil products. And then, yeah, there are a couple other categories, which are significant. I think actually electronic devices too. That was true, by the way, for the Chinese, maybe to a lesser degree. But remember, they made exceptions for consumer electronics, laptops, that some very significant product categories. And I understand it's also true for Brazil. Brazil's also been, slapped with 50% tariffs. So there are exemptions, but still, I mean, um, these are going to significantly affect trade between the U.S. and these countries.
Right. What I think Trump's trying to do is he's trying to pinpoint products that maybe won't have much of an effect on inflation, because this is my worry, is that he goes out and says, look, we levied 50% tariffs on countries like India or whatever, and your price of your Walmart goods aren't going up. It's like, yeah, because he isn't targeting the energy sector. He isn't targeting more elastic goods. It seems like he might be making carve outs for items that he knows won't hit the average everyday consumer in the pocket so much. So as he's able to say, like, look, these tariffs, I'm raking in all this money, and the everyday American citizen might be thinking, well, okay, maybe it isn't affecting inflation. Do you think that's the
Yeah.
strategy?
I don't know, because the thing is, there are so many countries that have been sanctioned. We well, to be very, yeah, more properly so, they've been subjected to tariffs, and some, not as high as in the case of India and Brazil, but quite high. Switzerland, for example, 39%. And all kinds of Southeast Asian countries are around 30%, and then the the Europeans are looking at 15%. When you add it up, worldwide, there is going to be an impact. It is going to have an inflationary effect. India by itself it's not going to make that much of a difference. It won't. India just doesn't sell all that much to the U.S. market. It'll matter, like if you're within certain industries, or if you look for certain consumer items, you'll notice the difference, but the average consumer wouldn't notice the tariffs that have been imposed on India. China's a different story. We would notice pretty quickly, and we were beginning to notice when the Trump administration climbed down from the previous 145% tariffs on China. So this is all kind of silly again. It's just like, that's the main customer, and you're just we're not talking about them. Maybe he'll come through and slap the 100% tariffs or 50% tariffs or something on China today. I don't know, but he's just not talking about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I shouldn't try to reason what Trump is thinking. It's try to apply some logic to it. Like maybe this is his plan. It's like maybe just assume that it is pure chaos. Um,
Yeah.
but the tactic that Trump seems to be adopting is always to bully and to threaten, and it just isn't working anymore. But we see him constantly only using that method. It's just like, you better do
Right.
this or else I'm giving you a deadline. Like he said, like he's the school teacher and these are errant school children or all these other countries, these great powers. Why doesn't he try to adopt a more friendly approach?
Yeah, that's just not Trump. It isn't. He doesn't seem to understand how diplomacy works. Yeah, this is not diplomacy; it's bullying, and you can see it actually does work, at least in the short term, with small, weak countries. Small countries and very dependent countries like the Europeans. It did work in the case of the EU. It did work in the case of the UK. These are big countries, but they're just so utterly dependent. They've made this conscious choice to depend on the US rather than taking advantage of, the opportunities afforded by the emerging multipolar order. And so they've been put in a position of extreme weakness relative to the US since they just caved in. And then small countries like Panama, and other smaller Latin American countries find that they just don't have a choice, but at least in the short run, they cave in and he gets what they want from them. At least some of what he wants. It's unclear about, some of his claims, but the tariffs are indeed imposed. But in the case of these larger countries, Brazil, India, China, these are great powers or near great powers, and they have a sense of pride and they have options. And, clearly this is actually having a negative effect on our relations with these countries. We've had historically good relations with India. India has always pursued a policy of neutrality, going back decades and decades and decades. They were really the leader of the non-aligned movement during the Cold War years. And so they've always made a point of maintaining good relations with the U.S. while also working to maintain good relations with Russia and to a lesser extent with China. But now they've had friction with China, but that friction seems to be subsiding now. And most likely, with these kind of this very hostile approach taken to India, it's going to drive them closer to China. So we see, for example, as a consequence of these tariffs, the Chinese just announced that they're canceling purchase of American military equipment that they were planning to purchase. I believe it was some U.S. fighter jets, and they canceled the order. They have no. I don't think it was the F-35.
No.
Yeah. But anyway, it doesn't really matter exactly what it was. It was just a major order of weaponry from the U.S. and they've canceled it. And I think it's just a sign that look, if you're going to be unfriendly, we're not going to make an effort to be in your good graces because it doesn't serve any purpose. It seems. You won't respect our neutral status, and this is something that's very important to us. This is, and we're just not going to be pushed around. We're a country of 1.4 billion people.
Right, it's very understandable. Right, it's completely understandable. It's hard to understand what he's thinking, because even when he does secure a deal with like the European Union, the UK, or Japan, he just gloats. He makes it feel like the other guy's side got screwed, that it was somehow a zero-sum game, and he just says, haha, like those guys, those suckers, I took them for a ride, basically. That's how he acts. It's like my like Henrik, my son, he's like, whenever we play a game, he's like, haha, I win. It's like, well, but he's three.
Right.
And Trump isn't.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, no, I think it's very short-sighted. I mean, he can make short-term gains, and you could argue that he has succeeded in these dealings with, let's say, Europe and the EU and the UK, for example, and these smaller Latin American countries, you could say that, yeah, he's made gains. But each of these countries, they grin and bear it, but they're angry. They are, and there's a lot of anger within Europe. There's, unfortunately, there are a lot of willing vassals that just seem to say, yes, Massa, this is what you ordered, we will do it. But if you want to maybe end this vassal mentality on the part of the Europeans, this is probably the best way to go about it. It's just really, rub it in like he's doing. And so you have people like it was the Prime Minister of France who was really furious about it, and I'm sure others are too. And it's just like I think by doing this, these people are so used to, most of the people in charge are so used to just following the U.S. lead that it's really hard for them to change their mentality. And that's what you see. But there's got to be other people waiting in the wings who are truly angry about this and are looking at options and saying, maybe before they were willing to go along, this is an arrangement we've had for decades. It's worked. They say, it's really not working now. We got to look at other arrangements. And the more it doesn't benefit him any to gloat. And it has the effect, right? Again, of unnecessarily angering these people that he is, who are on the other side of these deals, and it's certainly going to goad them to look for alternatives. I think there's no question about it.
Right. Do you think this move has pushed India then fully out of America's orbit? Is that what it's done?
Well, I think it's probably too early to say that, but you could say that they're taking a step in that direction. Um, um, they have made further moves. You don't know if this was going to happen anyway, but they certainly have taken further steps to ameliorate their relationship with China. They were taking a step in that direction, but this is, obviously a further incentive. And then there was the cancellation of that order. I mean, that's a sure sign, and I don't think they're going to, the Indians are going to continue to have a policy, that puts neutrality first. But they're going to make adjustments to the course, and to this policy, and I think we can see them already. That the U.S. is going to have its role, its importance in this balancing of relationships is going to be reduced, and they're going to try to improve relationships with China and maybe further solidify the relationship with Russia, which is already very strong. But here it makes a lot of sense to make it stronger. They've said Russia, over the years, including during the Cold War years, has always been a reliable partner. Never tried to twist their arm. Never did any of these kind of things. They've always kept their side of the deals, and at the same time they haven't interfered in their relationships with other countries, unlike the U.S. I think even during the Cold War years, sometimes the U.S. would try to pressure India, to reduce its relationship with the Soviet Union back then. But the Soviet Union, from what I understand, never did, and Russia hasn't. So it's something that say, well, this is the kind of partner that we want to have. And I think we just want to actually strengthen our partnership, expand it.
Right. If the U.S. all of it does is it just twist arms, or it secures these deals and gloats about it, then you think that all of these people that live in these countries, they'll begin to just resent the United States and no longer want to buy American goods anymore. I think this would have to have an impact. I mean, think about if you're in the UK or you're in Japan and you just secured some car deal, and then Trump was just like, look at these Japanese suckers, took them for a ride. If I was a Japanese guy, I'd be like, I don't want to buy an American car. Maybe I'll start buying goods otherwise. Right. I think this has got to damage just the American brand globally, right? Are we seeing any impact on that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's probably too early to say, but I think again in the long run, even in the medium term, that's inevitable. Again, like soft power was was very important in maintaining U.S.-led global hegemony. over the decades, and it was very powerful. It was something that you can even see the after effects of it here in Russia, where I am right now. But because of U.S. actions, that has been greatly diminished. Yeah, I mean, I think in the past people wanted to associate themselves with the U.S. It was certainly true here in Russia during the '90s and the 2000s. But now, no, not so much. There's a residual, maybe respect or for American brands, but it's been greatly reduced. There isn't that love of America, which used to really exist, in Russia and still exists in some countries. But yeah, because of recent American actions, it's drying up, and that, again, you can lose the soft power and still through military might and economic might, you can maintain a certain amount of control. But the control becomes much more difficult. It's much better if you have actually kind of willing partners, people who want to be with you, want to work with you. You have a people, governments that understand their people actually are pro-American. There's very strong pro-American sentiment, and they work with it. If that starts to dry up, then the whole that process of control, or that becomes much more difficult to carry out from, and governments again begin to look for options. And the thing is, there are a lot of options these days. There was a time, like we pointed out, where, again, like if Trump was president 25 years ago, he could do these things, and a lot of these countries would just have to bow down and accept it. But he can't. Now it's just not so easy. It's easier for India to say no. And China, very, very definite no. There was a time when they probably couldn't. They would have been very greatly angered, but they would just have to, they would have to concede. They would have to accept a lot of the tariffs or whatever that were imposed on them. Those days are gone. So, yeah, you're angering these people, and these governments, and these governments now have options.
There's always quite a significant time lag between policy and then when we see the actual effects on the street. Do you have an idea when you think we might be able to see the impact of everything that we're doing? Because right now it has to be damaging, as we're just talking about, just the reputation of the U.S. brand globally. Demand is going to go down. It's already affecting directly with the military industrial complex. You just mentioned that we didn't make that. India just canceled its big military order. I think people are going to want to buy less U.S. goods because they just don't want to support the United States because of its behavior. Just this uncertainty with all the tariffs has to be putting a dampener on investment within the United States, because who wants to invest if the rules are changing every other day? So right. Are we able to, but we don't see the damage yet, right? We are seeing some worrying numbers with the jobs, and, the inflation seems to be kind of just so right now. We don't really know, but I have a feeling that all this chaos that he's been doing the first year, we'll begin to see the effects in the second or third year. And do you have any idea of how bad you think that could be?
Well, again, there is quite a time lag when you're talking about investment, and inflation too. It's just like for example, in the case of these tariffs, when the tariffs were first threatened, what I understand is a lot of these companies, importers, for example, imported more than was necessary to get it, to get the goods into the country before the tariffs were imposed. So there were large stockpiles, and then they were able to, sell off those stockpiles, and that way they were able to avoid it. And I think maybe some of those stockpiles still remain. So you don't see the effect immediately. And then, price, a company is, often doesn't make these price decisions immediately. They wait, they see, they kind of maybe test the waters in the market, maybe raise the prices a little bit, see what the response is. But over time, inevitably, the prices will change. And I think they'll change, we'll see the effects. I'm sure there's some effect already, and there will be just more effect as we come to the end of the year and into next year. Now, investment, the impact of investment is slower. That's sometimes, like when you're talking about building a factory or whatever, this is a multi-year kind of project. But you're right, the chaos in our economic policy, it almost seems like it's really not right to call it a policy, but it's just the, this constant flurry of, uh, of executive orders, tariffs that are slapped on this country and that, willy nilly, for whatever reason, and then explained in all caps and in 10 exclamation points. This has been going on for a while, and sometimes they're reversed, but then they're reimposed. And, yeah, that has a very obvious dampening effect on investment. You just imagine. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that. But if you're going to, if you're looking at investing like hundreds of millions of dollars and sometimes even billions of dollars, to build up manufacturing plants in the US, you're considering that option. And maybe, because of tariffs, you have to have some sense of, certainty that, okay, because this may take 3 or 4 years to do it. And again, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. But then what happens if, well, next year he changes his mind and actually reduces the tariffs, or then the next administration comes in, because this is just sort of, he didn't, this was just Donald Trump. It's not it wasn't something that was passed by the Congress, debated, and then there was just a general consensus within the political class. This is what we need to do. See, if you do it that way, it may take a lot more time to get it done, but once it's done, it's much more solid. And then investors looking at that say, okay, that's the way it's going to be in the US for the foreseeable future. That's just the new reality. So let's adjust. We can, make our long-term plans. But now you can't make long-term plans. You just don't know what's going to happen during this administration or the next administration. So what you do, well, you just withhold investment. You just say, I'm not going to risk my, these hundreds of millions of dollars on this. And maybe you start looking at other parts of the world that are more stable.
Right. It's crazy to say that, to look at other places that are more stable, because that's what the US was. It was supposed to be stability. It was a place where you could park your money and know that it would be safe. But that's not the case anymore. And that's got to have a huge effect. And, there's rumors of a recession on the horizon. And we always, this happens. It's just part of the normal business cycle. But I'm getting the feeling that this next recession could break the United States. It's like every recession we have is a heart attack, and then we use our resuscitation machine, which might be quantitative easing. But you use it too much, and you're not changing your lifestyle habits. This time we go into cardiac arrest, and we try quantitative easing, it would just go into flatline. Or we, instead of flatline, we hyperinflate. I don't know if that's the best analogy, but you understand, right? That's what I'm worried. Do you think that's a real risk, that this next recession could be the last recession for the US that would break it?
Well, I'm not going to make that prediction, but there are worrying signs that we've never seen before. There is definitely a move away from the dollar and into gold, and that's something that we've never seen. Again, the U.S. money has been cheap. Borrowing it was basically you could borrow it for free. Essentially, the interest rates were so low for such a long time. And inflation was so low for such a long time. You just can't do that now. I mean, things are changing. It's just because, well, again, I guess I probably didn't explain that very well, but just because of the uncertainty, that was the big draw for the U.S. dollar and for U.S. bonds. You say that, okay, well, maybe I'm not getting the best return on my money, but I can park it there for 5 years, 10 years, whatever. I buy a 5-year bond or a 10-year bond, and I just know that it'll be good at the end of that time. There won't be hyperinflation. There won't be, the U.S. government will still be standing. And these other places, I just don't know. I think that certainty is gone. And so the U.S. dollar doesn't have the same draw. And therefore, we see that the interest rates are rising. And that puts, well, that means that, money is no longer free, really, for the U.S. government for a long, long time, because of the reserve status of the U.S. dollar. And again, this general reputation for safety. The rest of the world was kind of financing our debt. and we could just spend freely and, not worry about the consequences. Now we have this huge debt, and the rest of the world is starting to lose interest, or rather, is looking elsewhere now, and is moving out of the bond market in the U.S. It has become a rout, and maybe it could turn around again, but there's reasons to be concerned. Without that financing by the rest of the world, we're in real trouble. So when, like you say, if there is a recession, we go into a serious recession, we've always depended on, in recent, decades, on just the printing press. And that's, quantitative easing. And again, we could get away with it because the money was free. The money's no longer free. And it's going to be, we're going to find ourselves in a very, very difficult position.